Emma Lou Whitaker sat in the back of a locked patrol car, her face pressed against the cold glass as torrential rain turned her family's mountain into a river of liquid grave. In her lap lay a stolen briefcase, its contents revealing that her own sister wasn't building a legacy. She was burying a valley of toxic waste. The sheriff, the man she'd known since childhood, didn't look at her as he tossed her evidence into the mud. He only checked his watch, waiting for the mountain to groan. The earth beneath the car shuddered, a deep, tectonic crack echoing from the mine shafts below. Through the downpour, Emma Lou watched the headlights of a dozen bulldozers line the ridge like the eyes of predators. She had no keys, no allies, and the only person who could save the town was currently being hauled away to a state asylum. As the first landslide began to swallow the porch, she realized the safety concerns her sister cited weren't a lie. They were a countdown. The only question left was whether the mountain would kill her before the sheriff did. The oxygen tank hissed like a dying animal, its metal sides slick with coal dust that Emma Lou's fingers couldn't scrub fast enough. She spat on the rag, the taste of grit and rust coating her tongue, and scrubbed harder. The machine wheezed in response, its rhythm uneven, like Silas's breathing when the asthma hit bad. Behind her, the bulldozer's growl vibrated through the soles of her boots, shaking the loose boards of the porch. She didn't turn, didn't need to. The stench of diesel and hot metal already told her they'd moved closer, their yellow machines chewing up the land like locusts. Every vibration felt like a personal insult, a physical weight pressing against the small of her back. The air was thick, a humid soup of mountain mist and industrial exhaust that made her lungs ache in sympathy with the old man inside. She focused on the brass valve, her knuckles white and stained with a permanent grease that no amount of lie could ever truly lift. The world outside the Whitaker Hollow was moving in, hungry and loud. But here on the porch, time felt like it was thickening, turning to molasses. She checked the pressure gauge, tapping the glass with a cracked fingernail. It was low. Everything was running low. The air, the time, the patience. The roar of the engines intensified, a mechanical predator circling a wounded prey. She could hear the grind of gears from the northern ridge, where the trees were being torn from the earth like weeds. It was a sound of finality, the death rattle of the hollow she had called home for 34 years. The surveyor's boots crunched on the gravel before she saw him, his polished shoes already collecting a fine layer of Appalachian silt. He held a clipboard like a shield, his smile too wide, too practiced for a man standing on stolen ground. Emma Lou stood slowly, her height and broad shoulders casting a long shadow over the man's paperwork. She didn't speak. She let the silence of the mountains, or what was left of it, do the heavy lifting. The man's eyes flickered to the oxygen tank, then to the sagging porch roof, his expression a mixture of pity and bureaucratic indifference. "Ma'am, I need to confirm the eastern boundary. Company's got a crew coming through tomorrow," he said, his voice thin against the backdrop of the bulldozers. Emma Lou's nails bit into her palms, the sharp sting a welcome distraction from the roar in her ears. "This is the boundary. Has been since my granddaddy staked it." She stepped forward, closing the distance until she could see the sweat beading on his temple, could smell the stale coffee and mints on his breath. "You tell your crew to stay off our land. There are markers older than your company's charter buried in this dirt." The man's Adam's apple bobbed. He shifted his weight, looking past her toward the house. "Mum, the sale's all ready." "Sale?" The word tasted like battery acid, sharp and corrosive. She laughed, a short, jagged sound that lacked any trace of humor. "You think a piece of paper changes what's ours? You think a signature from a city lawyer wipes out a century of blood? Her hand shot out, her fingers brushing the cold plastic of the clipboard. She didn't grab it. She just wanted to feel the weight of the lie he was carrying. The surveyor flinched, stepping back as if he'd been struck. Somewhere in the distance, a tree snapped, a loud, bone-deep crack that echoed through the valley like a gunshot. He didn't stay to argue. He retreated toward his white truck, tires spinning in the mud, leaving Emma Lou alone with the roar of the machines and the hissing of the tank. The victory felt hollow. She knew the trucks would return, and they wouldn't come with clipboards next time. The sound of a luxury sedan, out of place and predatory, cut through the mechanical din. It was a sleek, black silhouette against the vibrant, dying green of the woods. The door opened, and Jolene stepped out, looking like she had been carved from a different world entirely. Her dark hair was a polished helmet, her suit sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't walk. She glided across the mud in heels that cost more than Emma Lou made in a year, followed by a phalanx of men in suits. Lawyers, consultants, the architects of ruin. "Emma Lou," Jolene said, her voice cool and smooth as riverstone. "You always did have a habit of standing in the way of things that move faster than you." "You brought a circus, Jolene," Emma Lou replied, her voice dropping into that low, dangerous growl. "But you're on the wrong side of the fence." Jolene didn't flinch. She gestured to the man beside her, a silver-haired shark with a leather briefcase. "The papers are filed. The homestead is being incorporated into the Blackwood Resort project. It's for the best. Look at this place, Em. It's a tomb. I'm giving Pa a chance to spend his last days in a facility that actually has working plumbing." The arrogance of it hit Emma Lou like a physical blow. Jolene wasn't just taking the land. She was rewriting their history as a tragedy that needed her intervention. The sisters stood 2 feet apart, the same green eyes clashing, one burning with the fire of the mountain, the other gleaming with the cold light of a boardroom. A ragged, wet sound erupted from inside the house. It started as a cough and turned into a desperate, whistling struggle for air. Silas. The stress of the voices, the vibration of the machines. It had pushed him over the edge. Emma Lou turned, forgetting Jolene, forgetting the lawyers. She burst through the screen door, the wood slapping against the frame. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of menthol and old wood. Silas was slumped in his recliner, his face a terrifying shade of gray-purple, his gnarled hands clutching at the air as if trying to catch a ghost. "Em," he wheezed, the sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "I'm here, Pa. I'm here." Emma Lou's heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned the cluttered side table, her hands shaking. The inhaler wasn't there. The emergency kit was gone. "Where is it? Pa, where's the medicine?" Jolene appeared in the doorway, her composure momentarily slipping into something that looked almost like guilt, though it was gone before Emma Lou could be sure. "He needs an ambulance, Emma Lou. This is exactly what I was talking about. You can't handle this." "Shut up!" Emma Lou screamed, the first time her voice had risen. She lunged toward the kitchen, toward the medicine cabinet where they kept the backup cylinders. Her boots thundered on the uneven floorboards. She ripped the cabinet door open so hard the hinge groaned. She found the medicine, but as she pulled the box forward, a thick manila envelope fell from the top shelf, spilling its contents across the linoleum. Her eyes caught a header. "Notice of petition for permanent guardianship and power of attorney." Her breath hitched. She ignored it for the second it took to grab the inhaler, rushing back to Silas. She pressed the plastic to his lips, timing the burst with his desperate intake. Once. Twice. She held him, her large frame shielding him from the sight of Jolene standing in the hall like a vulture. Slowly, The purple receded from his cheeks. His grip on her arm loosened. "Stay with him," Emma Lou commanded Jolene, her voice a deadly whisper. She walked back to the kitchen, her movements mechanical. She picked up the papers. It was all there. Jolene had filed the paperwork weeks ago in Nashville. She had used Silas's medical records Emma Lou had painstakingly kept, to argue that he was incapable of making rational decisions regarding his estate. She had painted Emma Lou as an unstable loiterer, influencing a senile man. The betrayal felt like a cold blade sliding between her ribs. Jolene hadn't come to negotiate. She had come to execute a plan that had been in motion for months. Emma Lou didn't go back to the living room. She went out the back door, her mind a storm of white noise. She needed to think, but the machines wouldn't let her. She found herself walking toward the old mine office, a squat building of cinder blocks and rusted tin that sat precariously on the edge of the northern slope. It was tilting, the earth beneath it eroded by decades of runoff, but it held the old records, the real records. She stepped inside, the floor slanting at a dizzying angle. The air smelled of damp paper and rot. She began pulling drawers, looking for anything, a deed, a survey, a letter. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Whitaker." The voice was deep, gravelly. A man stood in the doorway, blocking the light. He wore a black tactical vest with the Blackwood Holdings logo. He was broad, his head shaved, his eyes devoid of anything resembling empathy. "This is my property," Emma Lou said, her fingers closing around a heavy, leather-bound ledger on the desk. "Not anymore. I have orders to clear the site. You're trespassing on a construction zone." He stepped onto the slanted floor, his heavy boots making the boards scream. He reached for her arm, his grip like a vice. "Let's go. The easy way or the hard way." Emma Lou didn't hesitate. She didn't have the luxury of fear. As he pulled her, she swung the ledger. It was a massive thing, 3 inches thick and filled with a century of mining tallies. It caught him square in the temple with a sickening thud. The guard grunted, his eyes rolling back as he slumped against the doorframe, then slid to the floor. She was moving before he hit the ground. She stepped over him, her heart thumping in her ears. Outside, his black security truck sat idling, the door slightly ajar. On the passenger seat sat a leather briefcase, not the cheap plastic kind the surveyor had, but a heavy, expensive thing with a digital lock. She didn't think. She grabbed it, slammed the door, and vanished into the wall of mist that was rolling down from the ridge. The woods were her territory. She moved through the laurel thickets and over the moss-covered rocks with a grace that belied her size. Behind her, she heard shouting, the frantic bark of a radio. They were coming. She dove into a narrow ravine, pressing her back against the damp earth, the briefcase clutched to her chest. She stayed there, motionless as the searchers passed above, their flashlights cutting through the fog like pale, searching fingers. When the sounds faded, she pulled a small folding knife from her pocket. She didn't have the code for the briefcase, but she had the leverage. She jammed the blade into the seam near the lock, twisting with all her strength until the mechanism gave way. With a sharp crack, she spilled the contents onto the leaves. There were contracts, lists of names, local council members, the sheriff, the zoning board. Beside each name was a number, kickbacks. But it was the map at the bottom that stopped her heart. It was a geological survey of the hollow, but it wasn't for a resort. The hotel was a tiny footprint on the northern edge. The rest of the valley, the Whitaker land, the creek, the old mine shafts, was marked in red. Project Leith, Tier 4, hazardous containment. The realization hit her like a physical weight. The luxury resort was a lie, a beautiful, expensive mask designed to quiet the locals while Blackwood turned the hollow into a private toxic waste dump. They weren't building a future. They were burying a poison. And Jolene was the one holding the shovel. Emma Lou sat in the dirt, the documents fluttering in the damp wind. Her sister wasn't just a traitor to the family. She was an undertaker for the entire mountain. The anger that had been a slow burn for years suddenly crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. She gathered the papers, stuffing them back into the broken briefcase. The hollow groaned. It was a deep, subterranean sound. The protest of a mountain that had been hollowed out and was now being crushed. Emma Lou stood up, her jaw set. She knew what she had to do. She had the truth in her hands. But in this valley, the truth was only as good as the person willing to bleed for it. She began the long trek back toward the homestead, moving through the shadows. The rain began to fall, a cold, relentless drizzle that turned the coal dust to black ink on her skin. She reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. Jolene's car was still there, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Jolene stood on the porch, her arms crossed, looking out into the dark. She looked small from this distance, a tiny figure trying to command a landscape that had no interest in being ruled. "You've always been a slow learner, Jolene," Emma Lou whispered to the trees. She skirted the perimeter, heading toward the old tool shed. She needed a place to hide the briefcase, somewhere they wouldn't look. But as she approached, she saw the lights in the house flicker and die. The hum of the refrigerator, the low drone of the heater. Everything went silent. They had cut the power. Panic flared in her chest. Silas's oxygen concentrator. It had a battery backup, but it wouldn't last more than a few hours. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a siege. She slipped into the house through the cellar door, her boots silent on the packed earth. The darkness was absolute, smelling of damp soil and old preserves. She reached for the stairs, but a sound stopped her. A low, rhythmic whining. "Girl?" she whispered. The sound came from behind the heavy oak door where they kept the winter potatoes. She pulled the bolt. Her dog, a wiry mutt with one blue eye, lunged out, trembling, her tail tucked between her legs. The dog didn't bark. She just pressed her head against Emma Lou's thigh, shivering. Someone had been in the house. Someone had put the dog in the cellar while Emma Lou was in the woods. The violation felt greasy, a lingering presence in the air that made the hair on her neck stand up. She left the dog in the kitchen and crept toward Silas's room. He was asleep, his breathing heavy and mechanical, the small battery-powered portable unit hissing beside him. He looked so fragile in the dark, a collection of bones and memories held together by stubbornness. Emma Lou went to the window. Outside, the world was a chaotic mess of mud and machinery. She saw the two contractors, men she recognized from town, men who had grown up in these hills and sold their souls for a Blackwood paycheck, walking toward the mine office with flashlights. She knew why. They were going to finish the job. They were going to destroy the evidence she had been looking for. She didn't wait. She slipped out the back, the briefcase hidden under a tarp by the woodpile. She ran toward the mine office, her lungs burning. The rain was coming down harder now, the earth slick and treacherous. She reached the office just as the men entered. The building groaned, tilting another inch toward the ravine. "Check the floorboards," one of them shouted over the rain. Blackwood said the old man used to hide his ledgers under the floor. Emma Lou stepped into the doorway, her silhouette framed by a flash of lightning. "Looking for something, boys?" They spun around. Dale and Ricky. They had played football with her cousins. Now they were wearing Blackwood hats and carrying crowbars. "Emma Lou, go home," Dale said, his voice shaky. "We don't want to hurt you, but this building's coming down tomorrow. We're just clearing it out." "You're burying the truth," she said, stepping onto the slanted floor. "You know what's going into those shafts? It ain't tourist money, Dale. It's poison. Lead, mercury, runoff from the city plants." "Lies," Ricky spat, though he wouldn't look her in the eye. "Jolene said you'd say that. Said you were losing your mind just like your daddy." He lunged for her. Emma Lou was faster. She had spent her life hauling timber and wrestling mules. She was made of corded muscle and spite. She sidestepped him, her elbow catching him in the ribs. He went down hard, sliding across the slanted floor toward the corner. Dale swung a crowbar. It whistled past her ear, slamming into a wooden filing cabinet. The impact shook the entire structure. A ceiling tile fell, shattering on the desk. "The mountain's moving," Dale yelled, fear finally overriding his greed. "Then you better run," Emma Lou said. She grabbed a heavy chair and shoved it into Dale's path as he tried to regain his footing. The floor groaned again, a loud metallic shriek as the nails began to pull from the joists. She backed toward the tool locker, a heavy, steel-reinforced closet built into the foundation of the office. She lured them in, playing on their anger. As they rushed her, she stepped inside the locker, then ducked under Ricky's arm and kicked him square in the back. He stumbled into the small space, taking Dale with him. Emma Lou slammed the door. She threw the heavy iron bolt just as the men began to hammer on the steel from the inside. "Let us out! Emma Lou, the whole damn place is gonna slide." "Then start praying," she muttered. She knelt on the floor of the locker area, her fingers searching the gaps in the wood. Silas had told her once, years ago, when he was drunk and weeping, that the truth was kept where the tools meet the dirt. She found the loose board. She pried it up with her bare fingers, ignoring the splinters. Tucked into the hollow space was a bundle of oilcloth. Inside were 3 journals, their covers cracked, the pages filled with Silas's cramped, precise handwriting. She opened the first one. May 14th. The cracks in level 3 are widening. The company says it's settling. I say the mountain is hollow. If we keep digging, the whole hollow is going to drop. Jolene found the maps today. She told me if I told the union, she'd tell the sheriff about the accident in '74. My own daughter, my own blood. Emma Lou closed her eyes. The blackmail, the silence. It hadn't been cowardice that kept Silas quiet. It had been a father trying to protect a daughter who was already a monster. She stuffed the journals into her jacket. She had to get to the town hall. The gala was tonight, the big announcement where Jolene would sign the final contracts with the governor's representative. She turned to leave the office, but the world suddenly tilted. The floor beneath her feet vanished. The office didn't slide, it buckled. Emma Lou threw herself toward the door, her fingers catching the frame as the back half of the building disappeared into the dark ravine. She climbed out, her boots scrambling for purchase on the muddy slope, as the sound of the office's destruction echoed through the hollow. She didn't look back at the locker. Dale and Ricky would be fine. The locker was bolted to the main support pier. But they were out of the fight. She reached the house, but the sight that met her stopped her cold. An ambulance sat in the yard, its red and blue lights reflecting off the wet leaves. 2 deputies stood by the porch. Jolene was there, her face a mask of tragic concern. "No," Emma Lou whispered. She ran toward them. "What are you doing? Stop." "Emma Lou, stay back," Sheriff Reeves said, stepping into her path. He was a round man with a mustache that hid a mouth used to taking bribes. Your sister filed an emergency committal. Your father's in no state to be here without power or heat." "You cut the power!" Emma Lou screamed, trying to push past him. "You did this!" The paramedics were wheeling Silas out. He was strapped to the stretcher, his eyes wide and terrified, his hand reaching out into the rain. "Em! Pa, I'm here!" A deputy grabbed her, pinning her arms behind her back. She fought like a wildcat, her boots kicking up mud, but they were too many. She watched as they loaded him into the back of the ambulance. Jolene walked over, her umbrella held high by an assistant. She leaned in close to Emma Lou's ear. "He's going to a facility in Knoxville. High security. You won't be on the visitor list, Em. You're a danger to him. Look at you, covered in mud, assaulting guards. You've lost." The ambulance pulled away, its siren a mournful wail that faded into the sound of the rain. Emma Lou slumped. The fight seemed to drain out of her. The sheriff let go of her arms, his expression one of bored indifference. "Go home, Emma Lou, before I have to lock you up for real." They left her there, standing in the mud of her father's garden. The rain was a deluge now, a wall of water that felt like it was trying to wash the Whitakers off the map. She looked at the mountain. The trees were leaning at impossible angles. The earth was liquefying, the red clay turning to a slurry that moved with a life of its own. Silas had been right. The mountain was falling. She went to the woodpile and retrieved the briefcase. She had the journals. She had the kickback list. She had the hazardous waste maps. But she had no car, no power, and the only man who could testify for her was being driven away in a cage. "Not yet," she whispered. She remembered the old mine server. It was in a concrete bunker deep in the hillside, designed to survive a cave-in. If she could get the raw geological data, the sensors that Silas had secretly installed years ago, she could prove the mountain was a ticking time bomb. She trekked up the ridge, her body aching. She entered the mine through a ventilation shaft, her flashlight beam cutting through the damp, heavy air. The tunnels groaned around her, the sound of ancient timbers under impossible stress. She reached the server room. It was a tomb of old technology, but the green lights were still blinking, powered by an independent solar array on the peak. She jammed a flash drive into the port, her fingers flying over the keys. The download complete. She turned to leave, but a shadow blocked the tunnel. Jolene. She was alone, her expensive coat ruined by the damp, a small silver pistol held in her hand with a trembling certainty. "Give it to me, Em," Jolene said, her voice echoing in the narrow space. "The drive, the journals. Give them to me and I'll make sure Pa gets the best care. I'll even let you visit." "You killed him, Jolene," Emma Lou said, her voice flat. "Maybe not today, but you've been killing him for 20 years. You knew the mountain was unstable and you used it to break him." "I did what I had to do to get out," Jolene shouted, her composure finally shattering. "This place is a parasite. It sucks the life out of everyone. I'm turning it into something that actually has value. By poisoning the water? By burying waste that'll kill every kid in the next valley?" Emma Lou stepped forward. "You're not a mogul, Jolene. You're just a thief in a better suit." Jolene fired. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The bullet ricocheted off a metal server rack, a spark illuminating the desperation in Jolene's eyes. Emma Lou didn't wait for a second shot. She lunged, her weight bearing them both to the muddy floor. They fought like they were children again, a messy, brutal tangle of limbs and resentment. Emma Lou felt a sharp pain in her shoulder, a rock or maybe the gun. But she didn't stop. She wrenched the flash drive from Jolene's hand and pushed her back into the darkness of the tunnel. She ran. She didn't go back the way she came. She knew the secret paths, the ones the surveyors hadn't mapped. But as she reached the exit, the sheriff was there, his patrol car blocking the path. "Drop the bag, Emmylou," Reeves said, his gun drawn. "I've got a report of an assault and theft. You're under arrest." He didn't listen to her. He didn't look at the papers. He cuffed her, his movements rough, and tossed her into the back of the patrol car. He took the bag, the journals, the drive, the briefcase, and put them on the front seat. "You're making a mistake, Daniel," she said, her forehead pressed against the reinforced glass. "The mountain is falling. Look at the ridge." The sheriff didn't look. He picked up his radio. "I've got her." "No, she's combative. I think the lower shafts are the best place to hold her until the transport arrives." "Yeah, the flooded ones." Emmylou's blood went cold. He wasn't taking her to jail. He was taking her to the one place where a disappearance would be easy to explain. The car began to move, winding its way toward the mine's lower entrance. Outside, the world was dissolving. A small mudslide swept across the road, the car fishtailing for a moment before the sheriff regained control. Emmylou looked at the front seat. The keys were dangling from the ignition. The sheriff's pocket knife was clipped to his belt, within reach if she could just... She began to cough, a violent, racking sound that made her whole body convulse. "Hey, knock it off!" Reeves shouted, glancing in the rearview mirror. She slumped against the door, her eyes rolling back. "Can't breathe. Pause. Medicine." The sheriff cursed. He pulled the car over. He didn't want a dead prisoner in his back seat, not yet anyway. It was too much paperwork. He opened the back door, leaning in to grab her shoulder. "Come on, Whitaker. Don't you die on..." Emmylou's hand shot out. She didn't have Silas's strength. She had his cunning. Her fingers dipped into his pocket, snagging the keys and the knife in one fluid motion. Before he could react, she kicked the door open with both feet. The heavy metal door caught him in the chest, sending him flying back into the mud. Emmylou scrambled out, the handcuffs clicking open as she fumbled with the keys. She grabbed the bag from the front seat and vanished into the ventilation grate before he could even draw his breath. The shafts were narrow, smelling of wet iron and old fear. Emmylou crawled, her knees scraping the rusted metal, the sound of the sheriff's shouts fading behind her. She moved by instinct, following the draft of air that led toward the town. A rumble shook the earth. Above her, the mountain groaned, a sound of 1 billion tons of rock shifting an inch. Dust rained down, clogging her throat. She kept moving. She couldn't die here, not in the dark. She emerged from a drainage pipe behind the Johnson City Town Hall, gasping for air. She was a sight from a nightmare. Covered in red clay and coal dust, her clothes torn, her eyes wild. Inside, the gala was in full swing. She could hear the tinkling of glasses, the smooth swell of a string quartet. She slipped through the service entrance, moving through the shadows of the kitchen. She found the AV room, a small booth overlooking the ballroom. Inside, a young clerk sat at a bank of computers, looking bored and miserable. He looked up as she entered, his eyes widening. "Who are you? You can't be in here." "My name is Emmylou Whitaker," she said, her voice a low, commanding rasp. "And you're going to help me save this town." She showed him the contracts, the names, the maps. The young man's face went pale. I knew something was wrong. Jolene, she had me shredding things." "Don't shred this," she said, handing him the drive. "Put it on the big screen. Now, on the stage below, Jolene was standing at the podium, a vision of corporate success. And so, with this partnership, we bring a new dawn to the Hollow. A dawn of prosperity, of... The screen behind her flickered. It wasn't the promotional video of the resort. It was a scanned page of Silas's journal. Jolene found the maps today. She told me she'd tell the sheriff. The room went silent. The clink of glasses stopped. Then came the kickback list. The sheriff's name was at the top. Then the hazardous waste maps, the red zones covering the very land the guests were standing on. Jolene spun around, her face turning a ghostly white. Turn it off. Someone turn it off. The lights flickered. A deep, heavy thud vibrated through the floor of the town hall. The mountain was speaking now, and it was louder than any speaker. The double doors at the back of the hall swung open. A man in a wheelchair was pushed into the room by the repentant clerk. Silas. He looked small, but as he reached the center of the aisle, he stood up. He leaned on the clerk's arm, his voice gravelly but clear, carrying through the stunned silence. My daughter is a liar, Silas said, and the mountain is falling. If you want to live to see the sun, you'll get out of this valley tonight. The panic was instantaneous. The elite of the town, the politicians, the lawyers, they didn't wait for a vote. They ran. In the chaos, Emma Lou walked onto the stage. She stood face to face with Jolene. You lost, Joe, Emma Lou said quietly. Jolene didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just looked at the screen, at the wreckage of her empire. And then, at the mud-covered sister she had spent her life trying to outrun. The project was dead. The contracts were shredded by the very truth they tried to bury. 2 weeks later, the sun rose over a different hollow. The resort was a memory. The Blackwood trucks were gone, chased out by a flurry of federal injunctions and criminal indictments. Emma Lou sat on the porch, her hand resting on the head of her dog. Beside her, Silas sat in his rocking chair, his breathing steady, the oxygen tank hissing a quiet, rhythmic song. The mountain had shifted, a massive slide taking out the old mine office and the survey site. But the homestead had held. The earth had settled, the red clay hardening into a new landscape. A conservation easement was signed that morning. The hollow would never be mined again. It would be wild, a place of trees and mist and silence. Emma Lou looked at the road. Jolene's car wouldn't be coming back. The family was a collection of ghosts now, the bonds severed by greed and time. She took a deep breath. The air was clean, sharp and cold, smelling of pine and damp earth. You hear that, Pa? She asked. Silas closed his eyes, a small smile touching his lips. I hear it, Em. I hear it. It was the sound of the mountain, finally at peace. And for the first time in her life, Emma Lou Whitaker didn't feel like she had to hold it up. The land was holding her,